The following program about Kilmarnock's past was made possible by some of the businesses and organizations important to Kilmarnock's present and future. The Town of Kilmarnock, Dr. Curtis Smith, Mayor. T.W. Bonner Incorporated, trading as Kilmarnock Antique Gallery, Stephen Lynn Bonner, 144 School Street. 1017 Bay FM and We Go Country 1049, Kilmarnock's radio stations. W.F. Booth & Son, 4 generations and counting at 42 North Main Street. The Pedestal, custom decorating at 18 South Main Street. The Dollhouse, dolls and gifts at 50 South Main Street. The Kilmarnock Chamber of Commerce. The Kilmarnock Museum, 76 North Main Street. And NorthernNeckToday.com. Continuing a legacy of service to Kilmarnock and Virginia's Northern Neck. In the beginning, it was a simple crossroads for Native Americans who hunted and fished the plentiful waters of the Chesapeake. Then a tiny settlement anchored by an inn known as Steptoe's Ordinary. Later, a thriving commercial center based on farming and fishing and known as the New York of the Northern Neck. This is the story of a small town that persevered in the face of adversity and the people who made it special. This is Kilmarnock, Virginia. Living history. On April 18, 1776, almost a year to the day after American patriots stood up to the British at Concord Bridge, a Lancaster County silversmith named Raleigh Hazard purchased a 1-acre parcel from Thomas Pollard. The deed described the property as being near Kilmarnock. That was the earliest recorded reference to this community by that name. Before that time, it was called other things. Brainerd Edmonds, a former mayor of Kilmarnock and author of a book about the town's early history, recalls that Kilmarnock was originally known as the Crossroads.
Well, the Crossroads came from Northumberland County in there. So, Senator Norris told me about that part of it. He said that from Indian trails that came down out of Northumberland and into Lancaster before there was a Lancaster or Kilmarnock.
The early inhabitants of Kilmarnock were farmers, most of whom came from England and Scotland. Over the years, they prospered. The War of 1812, with British warships controlling the Chesapeake, took a toll on the Northern Neck, including Kilmarnock. The war left many families in the area poorer and required many years of rebuilding. As Kilmarnock grew in the 19th century, it did so around its churches. Kilmarnock Museum President Carol Lee Ashburn says the community drew well-known preachers of the day and produced a notable religious figure of its own.
We are the home of the first woman missionary to China, Henrietta Hall Shuck, who was born right here in the middle of town. The house that she was born in is no longer standing, but her father, Addison, was, I believe, the minister up at Meradica Baptist Church, which is still standing, and that's located in the picture right here, along with all the other churches here in Kilmarnock. Kilmarnock has quite a few churches, and that many of them are no longer standing. For example, St. John's, New St. John's Baptist Church was struck by lightning in Marin. The St. Francis de Sales Catholic Church, the building is still standing, but a new church is by it. Calvary Baptist Church is still here. Kilmarnock Baptist Church is still here. And this is the birthplace here. When you get close to this picture, this is the actual birthplace of Henrietta Hall Shuck. This is Meradica Baptist, where her dad was the minister, and this is the Kilmarnock Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is now a new building, and of course the Methodist Church has changed, and the Grace Episcopal, which is a larger church. Church Street has about 5 churches on it at the present time. The churches provided the people comfort during and after the Civil War, when the Northern Neck, along with the rest of Virginia, struggled to regain its prosperity.
After Virginia ratified the 14th and 15th Amendments, a prosperous African-American gentleman farmer from Kilmarnock, Armstead S. Nickens, was elected to the House of Delegates in 1871, representing Lancaster County. Nickens worked diligently to pass legislation to build a bridge over the Rappahannock River at Tappahannock. Though he didn't live to see it built, his efforts eventually helped lead to the building of the bridge. Until well after the Civil War, what is now Kilmarnock was a number of large parcels, home to many of the community's leading citizens. As prosperity eventually returned to Kilmarnock and the rest of the Northern Neck, an emerging merchant class began to buy up those large parcels as sites for stores and other businesses. In the late 1890s, T.W. Bonner purchased what was known as the Old Tavern Lot, right about here. Today, his great-grandson Steve Bonner, owner of Kilmarnock Antique Gallery, is a fourth-generation Kilmarnock businessman.
I think it was 1896, my great-grandfather built a two-story building where the Rappahannock Art League is now. And it was a frame building. Upstairs, they had a church at one time. I think Kilmarnock Baptist Church was there. Rented it for $33 a year, I think is what the article says. The town had their meetings there. I think I've always heard that a holly ball was there. And downstairs they had a store.
At about the same time, two brothers, Gus and William Eubank, who had been clerking for local businessman J.B. Crawley, purchased a 1,000-square-foot store at the corner of Main and Church Streets. Augusta Eubank Salou, granddaughter of Gus Eubank, says Eubank and brothers supplied Kilmarnock and surrounding communities.
In his store, you could buy everything from ladies' hats to horse collars to feed for your animals and groceries.
As Kilmarnock grew, so did its traditions. Its citizens had always joined together to celebrate the Christmas holiday, and in 1895, a holiday tradition was born.
A tradition since 1895 in our little town has been the Christmas Holly Ball. In that year, it started with a very simple party held at the Eubank Hotel. Mr. John Palmer, who was another prominent person in our neighborhood, at that time, during the party, decided to crown Miss Cora Brent as Holly Queen. So she was crowned the Queen of the Holly. The tradition has come forth generation after generation. It's changed many times during those years, but it still exists.
Kilmarnock's prominent families were the families of its growing business and professional community. In addition to Bonners, Eubanks, and Palmers, other prominent families included the Brents, the Shermans, the Smithers, the Halls, and the Edmonds, just to name a few. J.B. Crawley, meanwhile, remained an important figure in Kilmarnock's growth, building a number of houses and eventually founding the community's newspaper, the Rappahannock Record. At the dawn of the 20th century, Kilmarnock, Virginia was a small but bustling community with a growing number of businesses and a thriving population, thanks in part to the emerging fishing industry. But the community would be tested, literally by fire, 3 times in the span of 43 years. The 1890s were a prosperous time for Kilmarnock, in no small part due to the growing menhaden industry. This small bony fish meant big money for the men who worked the water and the businesses that supported them. The Eubanks built a wharf at the end of Waverly Avenue and later a fish factory to process the fish, adding to the town's prosperity. But on November 13, 1909, that prosperity appeared threatened. A fire broke out in an outbuilding of the Eubank Hotel and quickly spread to the main building. With the hotel in flames, the fire spread to the Frame Eubank and Brothers store, then to a livery stable. In a short time, those businesses burned to the ground. But the fire proved only a temporary setback. When the Eubanks rebuilt, they set their sights higher. The Frame store was replaced with a large brick building at the corner of Main and Church Streets. This building is still in service today. The Eubank Hotel was also rebuilt, a large, imposing building on Church Street with plush accommodations for visitors and a venue for the community's social events. That building still stands today and has recently been renovated. Owner Pam Deal recalls the building's long, proud, and interesting history.
It was the Eubank Hotel when it was built in 1910. Shortly after that, it became the Kilmarnock Hotel and then the Richard E. Lee Hotel. At the time when Peck Humphreys bought it, he changed its name to Standard Products Building. And then when I purchased it, I changed it to the Palmer Building. And I named it the Palmer Building for my great-great-grandfather, who was John Palmer, who was actually the founder of the Holly Ball. I think it survived mainly because of the 3 layers of brick that make up all of the exterior walls of this building. Also, I feel like the town really enjoyed this building for a lot of festivities. It was a center of action for the town and the surrounding communities. And I think people just loved it and enjoyed it and took great pride in being here. When I purchased the building, in one of the closets upstairs on the 2nd floor, right off of Peck Humphreys' office, was a box of keys. And the keys were marked with leather straps and the number that designated the room that they coordinated to. And then I was lucky enough to find on the back of some of the room doors the room rate card. You might also know that in one of the books that's furnished at the Kilmarnock Museum when Daba was young, which was written by a young lady who grew up here in the hotel because her parents were the managers here at the time. It tells about the taffy pulls that were held here for the community. It also tells about the watermelon feasts they had in the summer and the homemade ice cream parties that they had that was enjoyed by the residents, because at that time people lived here year after year, as well as the community people that took part in those events. Also on the 4th floor, where there's a cupola, the manager at the time raised lemon and orange trees there because of the heat and the sun that came through all the windows. There are 8 windows that make up the cupola. And she would send her children up to gather the citrus, whether it be oranges or lemons, and the children would bring them down and she would make wonderful lemon pie.
After the 1909 fire, there was a building boom in Kilmarnock. Businessmen added restaurants, a bowling alley, a furniture store, and a Masonic temple. A posh apothecary shop, Richardson's Drugstore, was a fixture on Main Street, helping Kilmarnock earn the reputation New York of the Northern Neck. Kilmarnock also had a baseball team that played in the Chesapeake League for decades. After the league finally died out, Kilmarnock's baseball tradition lived on.
We decided we'd try fast-pitch softball, and we started the Texaco softball team. They started in 1957, pick up the slack from the Chesapeake League. It was a travel team before the word travel team was used in softball. We were headquartered here in Kilmarnock, eventually in Lively, and we played until 1972. We were probably very unique in the fact that we played girls' teams. We traveled to Tangier Island. We played in the penitentiary. We played all over in any kind of team that would play us. We ended up winning more than 500 games, and we made news headlines around the world twice. Once we were featured in a national paper, and the second time I got in an argument with an inmate at the state penitentiary, and he eventually told me if I was honest I wouldn't be here, and I reported that, and UPI and AP both picked up on it, and he went around the world.
By 1915, Kilmarnock was firmly on a path of growth. Then, on the morning of July 6th, a fire started in the bowling alley on North Main Street and quickly moved down both sides of the street. It didn't stop until it encountered the brick buildings the Eubanks had erected at Main and Church Streets. Though devastating, once again, fire resulted in a building boom in Kilmarnock. Even frame buildings not destroyed in the fire were replaced with buildings made of a more fire-resistant material. Unfortunately, the builders failed to extend the brick firewalls through the attics. This oversight would have consequences 37 years later. Among the businesses taking root along Main Street were a soft drink bottling company, a car dealership, and a host of small shops. Albert Noblet and Sam Brown established a grocery store on the east side of Main Street. In 1919, local real estate developer A.E. Brent bought the property on the northwest corner of Main and Church and built what has been described as a monstrosity of a building. 3 stories high, it was shaped like a barn with cathedral-like windows. It had a cupola on top with a painted clock face. He named it the Hazel Building in honor of his daughter. It was remodeled many times over the years and was home to countless businesses, including an opera house that seated 500 people. In the 1920s, public education created more opportunities for Kilmarnock's young people. In addition to the private academies and seminaries, Kilmarnock had public elementary and secondary schools. African Americans overcame significant challenges when it came to providing public schools, relying on the hard work and sacrifice of the black community in Kilmarnock to build a school for elementary grades, then high school-aged children. In 1921, a young African American physician from Kilmarnock, Dr. Morgan E. Norris, returned to his community after his medical education at Howard University. He was to play a significant role in the life of Kilmarnock over the next half-century in the areas of health care, education, business, and advancing the cause of civil rights. With the help of prominent citizens like Jesse Ball DuPont, Dr. Jeter Edmonds, and other allies, Dr. Norris started clinics that improved health care for all. Dr. Elton Smith, Jr., who would grow up to be principal of the Morgan E. Norris School, first met the physician as a child when he became his patient.
I knew Dr. Norris as he was our family physician as a child. And also, when I was approximately, I believe, 7 or 8 years old, we had a bus accident coming from Tappahannock. And, of course, I was carried to Dr., along with others, carried to Dr. Norris's office. And that was from where I was even, had a broken leg, where I had the cast and everything put on there.
Dr. Norris, who lived in this house south of Kilmarnock, supported development of black-owned businesses and established a widely acclaimed fair, believed to have been on this spot near Lancaster for the area's black citizens after the Virginia legislature decreed segregation at public facilities in the state. When the school board began charging black children to ride school buses that were free for white students, Dr. Norris firmly stepped in to help the board see the unfairness of that policy.
He was able to bring people together to discuss the problems of that day. And they listened. Yeah.
The 1920s were a prosperous time for America, and Kilmarnock was no exception. But in 1929, Wall Street crashed and fear swept the land. Finding itself at a crossroads, this crossroads community boldly chose the path to a progressive future. As the Great Depression sapped prosperity everywhere, many counties found they were no longer able to provide services. That was incentive enough for many small communities to formally incorporate into towns. Kilmarnock took that step in 1930.
Well, Kilmarnock has always been called the Crossroads, and it's been one of the commercial hubs of this end of the Northern Neck for many, many years. Certainly by the 1920s, we already had our own water system here in town, and by 1930, it may have been just the logical progression for a town of this size to incorporate, get its own charter, and be a more formal entity, separate from the county.
A judge signed the incorporation papers December 8, 1930, and R.D. Carter became the town's first mayor. Days later, the Kilmarnock Volunteer Fire Department formed, with R.C. Saunders as its first chief. As a town, Kilmarnock continued to grow, adding businesses that served citizens throughout the Northern Neck. Very soon, Kilmarnock was considered the only place to be on a Saturday night. Around 1930, Kilmarnock got a state-of-the-art movie theater, the Fairfax Theater, showing the latest Hollywood films. The Fairfax became an institution, entertaining several generations of Kilmarnock citizens.
We had movies Sunday through Saturday night. Sundays, Monday and Tuesday were the primary latest movies. Tuesday and Thursday were mysteries, and Friday and Saturday were cowboys.
Though now less ornate, the Fairfax Theater building is still in use today at Main and Irvington Road. And the movie theater wasn't the only source of professional entertainment.
Now is the Adams Floating Theater. I know most of us have heard of the movie and the Broadway play Showboat. Well, that was designed right here. Edna Ferber was believed to have visited Kilmarnock and in this area when she was writing the book Showboat. And it actually came to Kilmarnock Wharf. And I do vaguely remember one time of going there. The thing that I remember the most about it, after the show was over, the play was over, they had what they call a concert. And for 10 cents extra, you could stay and see the concert, which was a band playing. But the show...
Agriculture fueled much of Kilmarnock's growth, as it had since the beginning. But by the start of the 20th century, the fishing industry was also helping Kilmarnock and its citizens prosper. Shortly before his death, Kilmarnock businessman William Crosby recounted his days on the Menhaden boats for a Richmond TV station.
On that net sometime, and they would cut right through your fingers and your blood would be running out your hand, and you wouldn't even feel it. I didn't feel it either. I mean, when the work gets so hard that we couldn't hardly move, we'd start singing. And that spirit would make the work easy. The spirit is what you need. Trust yourself, and all men doubt you. And all men doubt you. Trust yourself.
As the nation recovered following World War II, so did Kilmarnock. Then on a blustery St. Patrick's Day, 1952, disaster struck again. It would be a memorable day in the life of the town, especially memorable if you were a small child.
My very first memory of life was I was in the back of a car with my mother, and the town was on fire. I mean, it was, I've never seen sparks like that since. It was just a shower. When people say it was raining sparks, a shower of sparks, it truly was. And this was 1952. I wasn't quite 5 years old. I was like 4.5 years old. And I can remember being in the car. I can remember my grandmother was out in her yard trying to put out little fires that came along. And I remember her injuring her leg on a briar bush. Up in the flower bed trying to put sparks out.
The fire started in the Hazel building. No one to this day knows how. The wind blew through the great old building, turning it into a giant blowtorch. Pretty soon, Main Street was in flames, with the fire spreading from attic to attic, setting each building ablaze. Once the fire was brought under control, the Hazel building and 8 other businesses had been burned to the ground. Others were badly damaged. The worst of the destruction was on Main Street north of Church Street. Once again, Kilmarnock rose from the ashes. New buildings replaced those that had been lost. More commercial development was drawn to Main Street and beyond. As it rebuilt, Kilmarnock carried on its long-standing traditions. Holidays were celebrated with parades, and there was a sense of community that made Kilmarnock an ideal place for children to grow up.
I remember growing up in this town and everyone was my friend. I was everyone's friend. I could get up in the morning, and my biggest worry in the summertime was, what am I going to do to keep myself busy? And I could get up in the morning, whether it be 6 o'clock, 7, 8, whatever it would be, and come to town. I went in every store every day and talked to people. I knew all the owners of the stores. They were friendly. They were nice. I always had a trail of dogs behind me. I had one dog, a collie, but he had 6 friends, and they would all follow me. I can remember being in the grocery store, Narcissus supermarket, and then asking me, could I please leave because all my dogs had the door locked.
As Kilmarnock grew and prospered in the modern era, it made a conscious effort to reach back to its roots in Kilmarnock, Scotland, and that historic link is proudly noted at the Kilmarnock Museum.
The name Kilmarnock does have ties with Kilmarnock, Scotland. We claim to be the sister city. I'm not so sure that they do, but we claim to be the sister city of Kilmarnock, Scotland, and we have had exchange of mayor several times, starting in 1950 with Mayor E. Walter Harvey, and then Provost or Mayor of Kilmarnock, Daniel Kahns.
Those Scottish roots are also on display all about town as Kilmarnock celebrates its long and proud heritage that began with a series of trails winding their way through the Virginia countryside. From its days as a crossroads that brought settlers to a new world, to its development into a vibrant center of commerce, to its acknowledgement as the cultural capital of the Northern Neck, Kilmarnock, Virginia has been built on hard work and sacrifice, as well as a joy taken from the simple things in life. It is a way of life that is present today as its citizens go about their days with an abiding sense of contentment, with the knowledge that not only are they living the good life, they are living history.